I told him to save up for a trip like that. Apparently stuff around the house is stressing both him and his so badly with their kids that they are fighting over taking out $20k or $30k to go on a vacation. One vacation, then it's back to fighting and whatnot. Absurd. Imagine knowingly going into debt to go on one vacation. They both work too, which is even more baffling. Saw some guys at a stoplight in a convertible 6 Series BMW with the top down blasting music and wearing expensive clothes. I can see his dashboard. Every possible warning light was on. To be fair, in a bimmer those lights probably came on the day he bought it. Wearing brand clothes that have the huge name of the brand on them. I used to work in one of the brand stores and these were literally made for the lower class that wants to show off. More expensive and higher quality items never had this flexing on them. As a poor, I've noticed that less is more when it comes to casual fashion. Rich people on Instagram are probably mostly fake rich, buying followers. If I were a billionaire, I would not want to be tagged partying on a yacht, especially not in 2020. The only rich people that like to be tagged on their yachts are stupid kids and celebrities that make a living off being a public figure. Most mega rich people that can afford a yacht don't want people to find them through social media. Talking down to working class people. Don't get me wrong, there are definitely snootier upper class people, however in my interactions with them as a working class person in services they've always been extremely nice. My guess is because we both know who we are in society, so there are no pretensions. Fake upper class people have to completely reinforce the class divide. It had to be absolutely clear that they are and always have been above you. Part of me thinks it's resentment at what they might have used to have been, and the other part thinks it's how they think other upper class people behave. We don't get anything that scream pretending to be upper class in Australia at the moment. Thanks to our mining sector, at the height of the boom, someone could leave high school, get some tickets, and pretty much walk into a 6-figure job on the mines. So the young man driving around in an expensive muscle car while covered in tattoos. Runaway brides of Reddit. What's your story? What was the final straw? How last second did you leave? My friend met a guy and within a week they were engaged. He was in the military and ghosted her about a month after proposing. 6 months later he turns up and starts working at the same place as her and acted like he didn't even know her. Does that count? LOL. Damn. I was 17 at the time, and still in high school. Met an alleged army guy, pre-full swing internet, so no way to really check, and we hit it off. I was young and fell in love with guys really fast, so when he proposed, I was ecstatic. The red flags were there. He asked my parent for permission. He proposed loudly at a pizza shop, which, socially, would have been too awkward to say no anyway. He didn't have his own place. I never met his family. I never saw any evidence of being in the military. A few weeks later, we had a fight because he called out his sister's name during sex. He then told me that everything would be fine because he was going to take me to Kentucky to live on an army base. He also told me he wanted me to be barefoot and pregnant most of the time. Ha ha ha. We were going to get married and leave the day after I graduated high school. I did some real soul searching. I became withdrawn and quiet. I was visiting my nana one day and she asked me, "Are you in love with him or in love with the idea of a wedding?" And just like that, the bubble burst. I cried and broke it off with him. 2 weeks before I graduated. Apparently, he had already booked the justice of the peace. But he got married anyway 3 weeks later, with the same ring he gave me. Poor girl. I wish I knew her so I could warn her. Poor girl. I wish I knew her so I could warn her. You know the answer to this mystery. It was his sister. Had a friend that didn't know she was the bride until she was halfway down the aisle. Her parents had arranged a marriage for her, common in her culture, and had told her that the family had all been invited to her cousin's wedding. My friend was told everyone was going to be wearing white for whatever reason. I don't remember. They arrived at the church just before the bride was scheduled to walk down the aisle. My friend, thinking they're late, wanted to slip in and stay in the back. Her father, however, takes her arm and they start walking up the aisle. It isn't until they're halfway up that she stops and realizes everyone is looking at her and smiling and crying tears of joy. She turned to one of her aunts in the pew next to her and asked them who was getting married. The whole church went silent, and then the aunt looked at my friend's father and said, "You can't be serious. You planned a wedding for your daughter and just expected her to go along with it. Have the two of them even met? Did you seriously think this would work?" The whole room was them chattering about them, and the father just cleared his throat and told his daughter to keep walking. Luckily the aunt grabbed my friend first and pulled her into the pew, pushed her past the row of people, and they both ran out of the church. Her parents disowned her after that, and she moved in with that aunt. Wow, that's insane. The aunt sounds amazing. A woman I briefly dated was a runaway bride. Her ex never hit her but constantly belittled her and was basically emotionally abusive. Your standard kid, telling her she was lucky he wanted her, that she could never find anyone better, that she was ugly but he dealt with it, etc. 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 She was a smart kid, was a medic in the military, saving dozens of lives in Pakistan, but emotionally manipulative people can get anyone if given enough time, and he got her. On her wedding day, her dad, who wasn't usually in the picture, having divorced when she was a teen, was having a conversation with her in the ready room, and got concerned when she started repeating a lot of the things her fiancé was saying to her. She said that she was mid-sentence when he stood up and said, "Let's go to Dairy Queen," out of the blue. When she was little, they often went to DQ and talked over ice creams. She took a second, agreed, and they left to go to DQ. But he drove 3 towns over and they sat and talked over ice cream for hours while her phone rang, the battery dead in the car. She said she felt like a huge weight was lifted, and felt bad that her friends and family were waiting for her, but they would all understand later. He eventually went back to the church and told the bridal party it wasn't happening, and got his buddies to come and move all her stuff out the next day. She said that while her dad wasn't the best father in her teens, he was the best dad anyone could ask for that day. We dated for a couple weeks before we figured out we weren't a good match. We parted amicably, but I haven't talked to her since. This might be one of the most uplifting stories so far. Not me, and I'm not sure it counts as runaway. But my sister broke up with her fiancé 4 months before their wedding, which was already planned and paid for. I'll be honest, I don't know the full story. Even now, 18 months later, she still hasn't fully opened up to us about it. But I never really liked the guy. He was nice enough, but he absolutely could not handle his drink. He could never have a little drink. No, he had to drink the whole bar every time, then would come home and puke up over the entire house. He then had the audacity to complain whenever my sister would go out with her friends just for a couple of drinks, to the point where he eventually just stopped letting her go out altogether. His family was an absolute mess as well. His mum and stepdad were pretty cool, but they moved to Canada to pursue their dreams, leaving my sister and her fiancé in the hands of aunts and uncles who did not approve of her at all. His little brother was on off with his teenage girlfriend he eventually knocked up, and who was always trying to one-up my sister too. Eventually, as far as she's told us, she just felt trapped by the guy. She was prohibited from hanging out with her friends, and was forced to go to family events with people who despised her. He made her distance herself from us, which I think was painful for her, as she essentially missed quality time with her new nephews at the time. He basically controlled every aspect of her life. Anyway, she unceremoniously dumped him on New Year's Eve, and cancelled the wedding then and there. I don't think she even saw him again after that. She was always out when he came to collect his stuff. Obviously his family weren't too happy about it and harassed her for months. She became depressed and needed medication, but it was my family that had to foot the wedding bill anyway. They were just glad to have their daughter back. Those are classic signs of abuse. Typically the beginning signs, and it often gets much worse. Frick that guy. My dad was a runaway group. Broke it off 3 days before the wedding. Mid-1970s, so he was in his early 20s. His fiancée, not my mom, obviously, and her mother pressured him into proposing, which he did with my grandmother's ring. He also felt society sort of demanded it. It was more common to marry at that age than it is today. Deep down he knew she simply wasn't the one, but figured maybe all men felt that way before a wedding, so he ignored that and hoped his feelings would change. Months passed and the wedding was all planned out. When relatives and friends from out of town began flying in for the wedding and gifts were arriving, reality hit him hard, and he, to quote God Blue, realized he made a huge mistake. He sat my grandma and grandpa down and said, "Guys, I don't want to do this." They were proud of him for being honest and actually sort of thrilled. It turns out they hated her guts, but they told him he needed to immediately tell her face to face. And so my dad did, like a scarred war veteran. He refuses to tell me details, but said it was the most gut-wrenching conversation argument heck he had ever experienced. But he ended it. Of course, this was the 1970s. You can't just mass announce the wedding is cancelled via a text or Facebook message, which a friend of mine did. My dad took the responsibility of calling every single invited guest to tell them the wedding was off. Even more, he personally returned gifts to the people who sent them. His fiancée sold my grandmother's ring. His fiancée sold my grandmother's ring. Oh, that hurts. New boyfriend at the time had a female friend who, the night before her wedding, finally spilled to several friends, including him, that her fiancé had been emotionally and physically abusing her, and she wasn't sure she should get married. We'd all noticed her being distanced from us, but she'd deny every time that something was wrong. The next day, her family mobilized to get the word out to all her guests, and a bunch of her friends essentially forced themselves into the guy's house to get all her things back. My boyfriend was a cop, so had a duty to press charges or something on the guy. I was never clear on this part. The woman was pissed off at him for a while, but now a few years later is seeing someone great whom I've actually known forever and is quite a bit happier now. Plus, she knows her friends and family have her back and can get crap done. Told this story before on a somewhat similar post, but was engaged, so almost a bride, and there were several final straws. A few were before the engagement. He lived in his car. No judgment on that, but this is relevant. At the time, so was not financially stable, and this was just a couple weeks into dating. Another was him wanting me to send selfies of myself proving where I was at all times and what I was wearing, which was 99.9% my work clothes, black long sleeve shirts and pants, cASUal server, and at work. So if I wasn't texting back fast enough, apparently I was with another man. About a month into the relationship, he demanded a key to my condo, so he could see me whenever he wanted. The final straw was when he proposed, but down on one knee and said I knew we were meant to be the moment we matched, on Tinder. Go figure. I love you so much. Now I can show everyone I own you. Will you marry me, boy? Bye. That was 3 months into the relationship. I had never met his family but heard a lot about them. He had only ever met my mother, but that wasn't planned. I said no immediately and walked away. He tried getting into my condo countless times and calling me. Unfortunately, I had to change my number and get a restraining order against him. He was and probably still is crazy AF. One of the people I know is what I can call a serial fiancé. She dates guys right until they propose to her. Then she says yes, starts looking for venues, dresses, etc. And then she calls off the wedding and breaks up with the guy, saying I didn't wanna marry him anyway. He's, insert reason here. The last time this happened, she had an AMA about her wedding on Instagram. But 2 months before the supposed date of the wedding, all her photos, AMA answers and mentions of engagement were gone. Maybe she's getting a kick out of it, I don't know. Probably likes the idea fantasy of the wedding but not the actual commitment. Guessing reality never lives up to her expectations. What a sad life to lead. Not me but my mother. My mom called off a wedding just weeks before the ceremony date because she found out her fiancé had lied to her about his whereabouts and was partying at a hotel with